Welcome to my humble abode, darlings. Come in out of the rain and get comfortable. I have a story to tell you, and I hope you enjoy. If you do, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The Mecha Janitors War by Scare in the Box. Rain again, Todd said, resignation coloring both his blue eyes and his voice. He leaned back in his creaky chair, stretching out his legs. The jumpsuit uniform was at least clean, even if it wasn't pretty. "Thought we'd get a chance to rest," Allie said through the radio. Her jaded voice made it perfectly clear she knew better than to hope for such a thing. She could take it. The woman was tough as nails, a phrase he didn't understand given he'd never seen a nail. Those hadn't been used in almost 100 years. A guy can dream. Todd looked through the window of his tiny office, really more of a broom closet. He supposed he was the broom in this case. "Get suited up," Allie said. She'd be getting her own mecha, which made the order easier to take. "You're needed on the streets. Rain has rules like everything else." It wasn't just rain. Ordinary rain could have been put off for a while. This was mud rain, or the Mecha Janitors wouldn't have been called in. Mud rain meant mud covered everything, and mud meant cleaners were needed. God forbid the spoiled citizens have to get their boots muddy or not have a view through a clean window. He wouldn't even have minded except for the contempt that those citizens looked at him with whenever he did have free time. He and others were just reminders that in one area, the perfect city still lived on the toil of ordinary people. And in those cases of the Mecha Janitors, they had to be in sight of those people, not hidden away like those who did the dirtier cleaning jobs at night, or serviced the computers, or made manual safety checks. The problem was, the streets of the megacities were constructed without an eye to the changing modes of weather. They'd been designed with precision and purpose, for weather and society as their creators knew it. Every part of the city was constructed with the same exactitude. The streets were wide, often with 2 or more lanes for vehicular traffic, and separate lane for foot traffic. They were perfectly straight, running for miles on end, made of a resilient material that Todd didn't even begin to understand. It sure wasn't cement. Their design allowed them to survive the constant rain that fell from the sky. All of this had been done for humanity by computers over a century before. But the computers that engineered the city hadn't accounted for the mud. Somewhere along the line, clouds picked up dirt. Dirt mixed with water became mud, all mucky, gum up the works, mud that came with rain. And that meant people had to clear the mud. A thankless, boring job, but one that kept him from being one of the undesirables who wasn't welcome in the city. The wastelands awaited anyone who wasn't either part of a rich elite or contributing to society. These vast stretches of land covered the area between the megacities, filled with nothing but sand and dust. The soil leached and incapable of creating crops or supporting life. These places were only inhabited by the occasional animal and roving groups of humans, driven feral with hunger and thirst, their bodies poisoned by the water outside the cities. It was easy for Todd to imagine why these empty spaces had been left untouched by the city's creators. There was simply nothing of value left to be gained from them. Yet that's where the mud came from. He was pretty sure, like the waste was reaching in trying to touch the pristine city. The door of his office opened to a short, grated metal walkway, leading to the head of his mech bot. There's no nastier job than manning the ugly robot. At least he used to tell himself he had graduated from driving the trucks that actually cleaned the streets. Those people had to look into the eyes of the impatient citizens. He really thought that being a mech janitor was a setup. The pay was better after all. Turned out the pay was invalidated by the long, boring hours. Being a mech janitor had to be the single most boring job in the world. The trucks that cleaned the streets, at least, had an interesting view. People, even jeering people, were interesting. All he got with his mech was roof after roof of mud. In front of him stood his robot, not fancy or pretty like other things in the city, but huge, with a boxy body similar to that of an old washing machine. Someone, probably one of the other mech janitors, had attached a mustache to its front, giving the impression of a face. Despite being built to be manually piloted, the body was not comfortable to sit in, being too short to stand in, and not wide enough to comfortably rest his legs. Instead, Todd crouched inside and manned the controls for the legs and the single arm. This was Todd's second week, and with this particular Mechabot. His last had been much shorter. Not all Mechabots were the same, but their piloting consoles were, so switching didn't even add the entertainment of learning a slightly new system. The difference were in the legs, all different lengths to accommodate leaping from roofs or different heights. The legs were long and had many different joints, so that they moved more like the slithering of a snake than a person's single-jointed bend. Todd climbed inside and adjusted himself as best he could, with his hands on the control and one leg bent awkwardly to the side while the other jammed against the control panel. The Mechabot hummed as it turned on, and within minutes it was ready to take it out onto the rooftops. As soon as the Mecha was running, its single arm unfolded from a compartment in the back. The arm was metal and hinged with a sweeping apparatus at the end. To Todd, it looked like a very undignified broom. The warehouse door opened, and Allie's Mechabot rushed out. Todd had his out of the warehouse and into the city shortly thereafter. He had lucked into one of the taller Mechbots this time, and leaped to the top of a nearby skyscraper. The job had long ago lost any challenge it had. He piloted the Mechabot to clear the mud without any particular thought, instead staring down at the streets below. Tops of buildings were all pretty similar, not much variation. But the streets, those were interesting, even from afar. The radio in the Mechabot chattered with the voices of the other Mecha janitors. Todd switched it off, not in the mood for them. Sometimes it was more entertaining to be lost in his thoughts. The sides of the road were lined with buildings of all different shapes and sizes, from the high-rises, like the ones he cleaned, to the more modest structures. Each building had been built to last, with reinforced steel, concrete, and glass. Every inch of the building was designed with the utmost attention to detail, except the roofs, of course, and many of the surfaces are adorned with intricate designs and patterns. Todd couldn't make any of that out from where he was, but he knew all about the city from the videos he'd watched in training. Everything was functional, built to avoid the high-cost energy demands of the past. The walls of each building was designed to allow as much natural light as possible, while still providing adequate protection from the elements. At each street corner, tall street lamps clicked on and off at dusk and dawn. These were powered by a variety of renewable energy sources. Those original engineers had thought of everything except the mud rain, which to Todd seemed like a pretty major oversight. When the mud was at its worst, the ground people, as Todd now often thought of them, used a vast network of underground utility lines and tunnels. These tunnels were used to transport people and cargo, as well as to house a variety of pipes and cables that provided the city with its energy and communication. Mud rain was a frequent visitor in these megacities. That's what the informational video said. They also calmly stated that the muddy streets left behind could be problematic, more like the mud rain was constant, and the cities would soon be flooded if not for the street trucks and mecha janitors. Todd entertained himself with daydreams of being covered by a genius of some corporation and swept into a cushy office job where he never needed to look at mud again. By the 5th rooftop, he was pretty fully invested in his daydream. So invested, he almost didn't see the metal objects spitting down from the sky, covered in flashing lights. When he did note this strange object, his first thought was that he hoped it was there to give him a new job. He continued to clear the rooftop, but turned on his radio to talk to the other mecha janitors. "You guys see that thing?" "I don't remember seeing an announcement about any strange flying objects," Allie said. "You think they'd tell us this thing," Jordo complained. "Well, they should. We're up here in the sky," Kareem said. "Lots of lights seem unnecessary. They usually don't design things like that," Todd said, though he hadn't known he was thinking it until it came out of his mouth. "Doesn't seem efficient." "Ground crews got most of the streets cleaned already. We'd better hurry or we'll get in trouble," Jordo said. "Bosses won't care that we saw flashing lights." Todd moved to the controls so his mecha jumped to the next building. He'd have to hit the ground running, the space between. There were pads on the street designed for this, and people were supposed to stay off them, but they never did. He was careful not to step on anyone. If a mecha janitor did that, they were always big trouble. And no one cared if it was really the pedestrians' own fault. Not that Todd would have aimed for them anyway. But on bad days, he daydreamed about it. At least that wouldn't be boring. Today, the saucer took up most of his mental space. That wasn't boring either. He made it up to the next roof and started sweeping, but he'd have been lying if he said he wasn't mostly watching the saucer-shaped object hovering in the sky. He wondered if it was close enough, if he could reach out and touch it with his mecha. It didn't seem too far. "Shit!" swore Allie. A loud boom sounded from her radio. Todd kept sweeping, hoping she hadn't stomped a pedestrian. He liked Allie. Then the saucer in front of him did something. It spun faster for a moment, flashing lights turning into a blur along its metal hull. Then a bolt of energy shot out, hitting the street below. The boom was louder this time, and not coming from the mecha's radio. Todd peered down to see a smoking crater in the cityscape. His mind couldn't make sense of it. There was supposed to be a road and a little park there. It was the park he liked best, with a huge geometric statue in the center. No more road, no more park, no more statue. Eyes flicked back to the saucer. Todd's mouth felt dry. It was spinning slowly again. "I'm going to check it out," he said. "Don't do that," Jordo yelled. Todd didn't listen. He used the many-jointed legs of his mecha to climb down into the street. He found that he'd been wrong. There was no crater. The ground was blackened, sure, but it was flat and even as ever. But the people, where they had been, were big, gooey piles. Todd navigated his mecha towards the edge of the affected zone, where a group of still-moving people stood amazed. One of them knelt down to touch a gooey pile and then lifted the gunk up to his mouth. "It's sweet, like pudding." Todd knew he would think about the people piles hereafter as pudding. "What happened? Did anyone see anything?" said one woman in a neat suit next to the man by her. They both craned to look at the sky, but nothing was visible from the ground but the huge metal and glass walls of the towering buildings all around. Todd would have told them, but the mecha bot wasn't designed to communicate. "Those were people," another person wailed. Todd's radio crackled, dragging his attention back to the people who he could talk to, who were talking to him. "What's happening down there?" Kareem asked. "Are they melting people?" Allie said, obviously on the ground as well, or at least close enough to get a really good look. "Melting them into pudding," Todd said. He really didn't mean to say the words. It seemed disrespectful. But the words came right out of his mouth, disrespectful or not. Beams don't seem to affect the other structures as much. Just the people. Which was sad. Todd liked people more than he liked glass, steel, and polymers. even rude people who he occasionally fantasized about stomping on. "What do we do?" Allie asked. Todd's first reaction was to tell her to clear the roof. But that was their job. Let the thinkers think of solutions. But that was spiteful, and he knew it. Maybe the smarty pants in jackets could think of some great solution, but they couldn't implement it in time. Old societies used to have weapons, and people trained to fight. But the megacities had never kept anything like that. These were peaceful places, civilized places, as long as you ignored the people who were exiled to starve or go mad. But most people did ignore that. And anyhow, it didn't help at all with the current dilemma. A second beam fired onto the road, turning the crowd of people who'd lingered there into pudding. The boom momentarily deafened Todd from so close, and the air had a sticky, sweet smell that reminded him of rotten fruit or, yes, pudding. Todd set his mech to a crouch, and then had it leap back up to the rooftop. First things first, figure out what was happening. Are they firing into buildings or just the streets? "Into buildings," Allie said. Her voice shook with a frailty Todd had never heard from the woman. She was more like a superhero than anyone he'd ever met. If anyone could fight back, it would be her. The idea rolled into him. Actually, they could all fight. They were the only people up this high, close enough to strike at the saucers. "We need to fight him," Tom said. Not exactly rousing speech, but he wasn't the rousing speech type. "Nope, nope, and nope," Jordo said. "I'm not doing that." "We're the only ones who can," Allie said. Todd smiled, happy she was the superhero sort after all. He didn't need any nasty surprises. "What? We just hit him with our brooms?" Kareem asked. "We try," Todd said. The idea had seemed less ridiculous inside his head than when Kareem said it in that doubting voice. "My mech will take a minute to get up that high," Allie said. "Let's try to hit him all at once. One of us on each, the way they don't just escape and hover higher when we can't reach them." "I don't like this," Jordo said. "But you're in?" Todd asked. "Yep. You owe me a drink." "A full round on me," Allie said. That cinched it. If there had ever been any doubt, he'd never actually met his fellow mech janitors. They were always too tired after work. No real reason to meet. Well, he did have one reason. He'd always secretly wanted to meet Allie. He bet she was amazing in person, just as on the radio. Not that he was expecting anything to happen. Just he'd like to meet her. If being a hero got Allie in a room with him, with drinks, he was completely solid. Todd leapt across the few rooftops till he was only one jump away from the saucer. It spun and fired again, and Todd forced himself not to think about the people caught in that blast. "I'm in position." He waited for the others. "Me too," Kareem said. "Got one right above me," Jordo said. "What are all the lights for?" "Don't think too much, your head'll explode," Allie teased. "Then I'm in position." Now or never then. Todd suspected they'd only get one chance. Allie had a point that these things could fly. That meant they could get out of the way quickly. "On 3, Todd said. 1, Allie said, not even leaving the counting up to someone else. She was independent like that. Some might call her pushy, bossy even. In fact, some people did. Todd wasn't one of them. 2, 3. Todd jumped his mecha bot and swung the broom as hard as he could into the saucer's side. The metal of the saucer squealed and buckled. The pretty lights sparkled and went out. Then it started to move sporadically in the air, little jets of smoke coming out. He hit it again. This time it went crashing into one of the taller buildings nearby, dented and dark. The remains of the saucer lodged in the steel edifice of the mega city. Hopefully the city didn't blame him for that. "Everyone okay?" Todd asked. A breathy yell of celebration came from Jordo. Kareem gave a quiet yes. Nothing came from Allie. "Allie?" Todd asked. "I hope they don't try to charge us for damage to the city," she said. Todd wasn't about to reassure her because he really didn't know. Maybe if we finish cleaning the roofs, they won't notice. Everyone laughed. But he hadn't really meant it as a joke. And in the end, they did all end up clearing the rocks because, hey, someone had to. At the end of the shift, they all brought their mecha bots back to the warehouse and parked them. Todd wondered if Allie would stick to the promise of drinks. It turned out he wouldn't find out for several days. Far from blaming the Mecha Janitors for destruction of the property, they were held as heroes. Todd was paraded in front of so many beaming happy faces that he started to wonder if he preferred being ignored by the jeering ones. Best yet, the thinkers agreed to redesign the body of the bots with room to sit comfortably and even access to the internet for some entertainment as they piloted. Life couldn't have been better, and yet it got better, because Allie did remember the drinks. The four of them met in a bar in an underground tunnel that mostly catered to the working poor of the city. Kareem was taller than Todd expected, almost 6 foot and handsome. Jordan was older than Todd had expected, must have been nearing 70. Allie was short, a bit round, and every bit as perfect as he'd always known she'd be. When she walked in, she grinned at him and asked if they should order pudding to go with their drinks. Todd was certain he was going to marry her. So quoth this raven. And my darlings, it looks like Scare in the Box is going to bless us with more of this world. It looks like they're working on the Mecha Janitors Kaiju attack. So we have that to look forward. I think this is a very fun world. I see it as cyberpunk. I don't know how you see it, but anyway, have a great day, darlings. My darlings, it means so much to me that you come and listen to my little stories. I so appreciate it, but if you did like it, please feel free to hit the like button and subscribe so you can come back and hear more. My dearest thanks to my supporters, past and present. It means so much to me. Have a lovely day, my darlings.